All right, guys, I'm sorry for those of you that are gone. I'm gonna have to wait a couple minutes. I was on a previous live stream and I was trying to end the share screen and then I hit the stop broadcast button. So, I just got done calling that ADL an idiot, and here I am. So let's see if we can get some people back. I think I'm gonna have to go back to some of these people. If you're joining, sorry, that was me. It's my fault. The stream, I stopped the stream. I can see some of you are creeping back. So, yes, come back. Come back to me. So when I left off, I was talking about how, they took the bait from this group. Now, okay, let's say it becomes revealed that yes, this is a legitimate militia, and that they went and one of their members perpetrated this. Well, how do you deal with a group of dumbasses who, they're on media, they're on the social media or something, and they spread all of these rumors or whatever? Well, their answer would be, then it goes beyond. Listen to the next argument in this. If it was to be revealed that this shooter actually belonged to a real internet militia group, then the next step is beyond gun control. The next step is internet censorship and spying on people on the internet, which, obviously they already do perpetrate on many levels. I think we lost some people, but what are you going to do? I hope those guys come back, because we had like a good thing going. Yeah, I see there's a bunch of you, but it says there's only 3 of them. Yeah, and Pinochet brings up a funny detail that is not lost on me or most people who are talking about it, that if it's a whites only group, then this guy's name is Cruz. He might be like this is South Florida, so he might be a Cuban American. He might be Puerto Rican. He might be Argentinian. He might be whatever. But he's not, most of these white supremacist groups, and I know that they mentioned one of the other guys' names was Cedeno, probably Cedeno. They didn't have the little tilde above the Nye, but yeah, this sounds like a group that is a fucking prank, and I don't believe at all that this group had any connection to this. I think, and I'd also read, there was a Republic of Florida. There's another one in the Independent, the British newspaper, saying, well, the leader of the white supremacist group confirms, then appears to deny Florida militia's ties to the to the shooter or whatever. It's bizarre. It's just ridiculous that people would just take the bait so quickly. And it's been known for years that when terror groups, for example, when terror groups try to take credit for terror attacks, often you'll have two different groups going and calling in and saying, "Hey, this is the the I don't know, the Dominican Anus Patrol or something." I just made that one up. There's not really a a group called that, but there's all of these groups that they they're competing for attention. They need attention and they want notoriety, and they're known to call it in. And trolls trolls do it just as well. So you could have terror groups that are not responsible calling in. You could have groups of wannabe terrorists or whatever. So it's really just a joke how these how these media organizations fall for it, and the ADL as well. Really, it's ridiculous. So I want to steer the conversation to legislation and why they're always. Lisa PDX says that we should make something called the Dominican Anus Patrol. I don't know why I said Dominican, but it could be because I know a few people who I know a few people from the Dominican Republic, so I just blurted that one out. I might as well have said Colombian or something. I don't know. So it's not the truth until CNN reports it. Not. So legislation. Let's talk about gun control laws. And when I hear big government ideas and people proposing it, one of the first things that I've learned to do, and very recently, is to think about has Japan done it successfully, and if Japan has done it successfully, it is it is very likely. Excuse me, the Hillary cough is back. If Japan has done it successfully, the question is why and whether America is capable of doing it. Now, why Japan? Well, Japan is a very regulatory country, but they're also successful in promoting business and getting business and labor to work together. And they're a very cooperative society. They have a collectivist view of life, but they're not communist in their collectivism. They're more, holistic and natural. And that's why I'm a huge admirer of a lot of Japanese cultural features. I wouldn't say I'm very knowledgeable about it, but what I do know about it, I very much like. They're a country where discipline and hard work are a real value, and cleanliness or whatever. You can see that I don't really hold to that value based on the bookshelf behind me, but that's a different matter. And by the way, the living room's also a mess. So that's why I say, has Japan done it successfully? Japan has universal health care. Why is Japanese universal health care not the envy of the world and Swedish is? Well, because Japan is a country that they don't believe in mass immigration, and they also don't believe in health tourism. You can't. I don't believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'll just type it in real quick. But health tourism, which is a problem in they do have something, but I think you do have to pay through the nose to do it. And staying abroad in Japan is pretty expensive. So it's not like you can do this for the price of a fish and chips, as they say in some quarters. Okay, maybe they don't, but yeah, Japan has universal health care, but Japan is a totally different society from us. They limit their immigration. They eat healthier, and Japanese are there's. I'm not saying Japan is a perfect society, but a lot of the flaws and the vices that we have in the United States, the Japanese are better at just controlling them and minimizing their impact on their lives. And there's And I'm just talking at a general level. So that's with healthcare and gun control. Japan has done very successfully, and they did it successfully because after World War II, what many Americans fail to remember is that Japan demilitarized, and they decided that they would change their society from a militaristic one to more of a commercial, mercantile society where they believed in in heavy industry and selling their products to the world and focusing on civilian ways of interacting with the world through trade as opposed to militarism. And I think we should have taken an example from Japan in 1991 when the Cold War ended, 1989 and 1991. 1991 was technically the complete end of the Cold War. The Soviet Union fell apart. The whole world should have done what Japan did and scaled back their military and used their military power more to deal with the terror threat and specific threats instead of maintaining this massive NATO army or whatever. But Japan, not to digress too much, Japan after the war, they decided that they would ban private firearm ownership, except for very rare cases, and they also scaled back the power of the police. It became much less of a police state than other countries in the Western world. And it's funny calling Japan a country of the Western world, but they are, and they embody some of the best results of Western economics and even I wouldn't know if to say if cultural values, but what they did was they created a society where you know armed citizens weren't really that common. And once again, you have to ask yourself. That's why I say focus on whether you can do it the way the Japanese have done it, if they've done it successfully. Are you willing to have a society where children go to school often for 6 hours after their regular school? It was 6 or 7 hours. I've seen that, and they just cram for tests or whatever. Japan is a cramming nation. They're a nation of people that most of the people there they aspire to steady employment. They aspire to a very good well-educated job and lifestyle. So and they're very strong in the technical fields and in the STEM fields, and therefore, and they're homogeneous. They don't have a lot of immigration. And, that's where people get me wrong, and they'll say, "Oh, you're making an alt-right argument that we should be like Japan." No, I'm making an argument that we're not like Japan, and that people have to get a grip. Japan also geographically, remember, it's an island, so you're able to control the influx of weapons or other contraband into Japan. That's why they're also their drug laws are actually harder than in the United States. So drug smugglers don't like to come into Japan, and the cost of smuggling something into an island. Remember, so you have to get a seagoing vessel that's able to load up enough merchandise, illegal merchandise, to bring to a country that has a modern Coast Guard or Navy, and risk 20, 30 years in prison. And many people, how can a drug trafficker arrange to bribe officials in Japan? It's much more difficult than in the United States. It's a society that has a much stronger ethical and what do you call it, legal legal structure than in the United States. We have much worse corruption in the United States than they have in Japan. So you have several factors working against you as to why we can't ban firearms like they have in Japan. First of all, we're not an island. We have two very large land borders where people can just smuggle shit across and often encounter no barriers. Okay, so that's first things. Then you have the issue of the society itself. Japanese society is much more communal. I don't believe that you would see uh, the type of school shootings there if there were weapons. Japanese crime is also much less petty. You won't see slums of people basically living day to day with horrible street crime in Japan. At least not to the degree that you see here in America. Their organized crime is known to actually be a stabilizing factor in society. The yakuza. I don't know if they're as powerful as I used to read that they were, but um, that's why that they should really think about that. And the other country used as the example for successful gun control is Australia, which once again is another island. And people, there's a huge debate over whether their gun control has resulted in less crime or more crime or whatever. And I'll leave that for a different day. But yeah, they're an island again. So when you talk about getting weapons into Australia, the cost and risk of doing it is kind of high. You have to have people willing to take a seagoing vessel and smuggle it into Australia, or you could smuggle it in through the ports or whatever. But it's a tremendous risk compared to smuggling it through a land border. On the other hand, you have countries in Asia like the Philippines, which is also an island country, but there's so many islands that are so remote that it's almost impossible for them to impose gun control. So and there's cottage industries in the mountains, and I've seen a National Geographic documentary on it where you have people that they're dirt poor, they're up in the mountains, and they're forging these guns and selling it across the world. So how are you supposed to deal with that with these ghost guns that are you cannot control weapons commerce just by passing a law. It's ridiculous. And these are the same people that are always saying, well, we have to end the school to prison pipeline and blah blah blah. Okay, so how are you going to do both? How are you going to do both? Now you're going to have a farm to prison pipeline. You're going to go out to the country. You're gonna rustle out all these rednecks with their guns, and in order to get that farm to prison pipeline, you're gonna have to have a cop to grave pipeline. That's the worst thing, that they're gonna end up putting law enforcement officers at risk as well, with some of these paranoid individuals that do exist among the gun owning community that won't give themselves up, and they'll be able. People think that this is such an easy matter just to confiscate people's weapons or whatever. It's not. It's going to be, if they get what they want, it's going to be truly a national a national tragedy everywhere it happens. So I do have a little feature about the German gun control system. It says here for 2010, the Federal Criminal Police Office of Germany reported a total of 3,216 homicides. Of these, 147 were perpetrated by gunshot, and in another 13 cases, the victim was threatened with a gun. For 2009, the office reports 3,269 homicides, 179 of which were committed by gunshot. So, they have the strictest gun control laws in Europe, but I would say that this seems to show that only about 5% of the murders that were committed in Germany in those 2 years were actually committed with a firearm. So what's the conclusion from this? And let me take a look at the chat real quick to see if anybody has anything to say. Hi, Chris. Welcome back. Pinochet says, "For my cold dead hands." Oh, okay. They'll do that, by the way. They will kill people in order to take their weapons, because in the end they'll just call them some sort of Nazi or something. Even though when you take somebody's shit, I'd say that's kind of a Nazi thing to do as well. Lisa says Germany enjoys importing rape refugee countries, so I don't think that counts. Well, This was statistics from 2010 and 2009, so I'm not sure that. I think the rape has gone up in the last 4 or 5 years. So let's leave the rape aside. And the rape is an important part. Like there's a question: how did these homicides happen? What was the other manner of death or whatever? So Germany, it says here overview. You know, I'll just show the screen for a second. This is from the Library of Congress, so you don't think I'm taking this from the NRA or something. See, it says. I hope I don't press that fucking button again. You guys would probably, you know, flip a shit over it and get drunk on gin yourselves. But it says Germany has one of the most stringent gun control laws in the world. The current Weapons Act deals with guns suitable for private ownership and it contains a highly differentiated regime for licensing, the acquisition, possession, and carrying of permitted weapons that restricts, according to the criteria of need, the number and types of guns that can be owned or purchased and has specific age restrictions for different types of weapons. The Act bans automatic firearms, regulates the production of and trade in weapons, and has reported requirements that allow the tracing of every legally owned firearm, including those acquired through inheritance. Moreover, the Act contains stringent and enforceable requirements for the safe storage of guns. The Act is implemented by the administrative authorities of the states. So Germany has states as well as a federal government, except for the newly created National Weapons Register, which is a federal agency. So, you know, they have a bunch of restrictions. It says bans fully automated. Pump action shotguns with pistol grips were banned in 2008. Yeah, that would suck. Although I don't think pump action shotguns with pistol grips are that fun to use. So they did it in response to the Erfurt massacre. The above described multiple shot short arms were banned at the same time because shots fired with these weapons are able to penetrate bulletproof vests. Firearms that are not banned are still subject to various restrictions on the basis of licensing provisions and intended use. Thus, for persons who require a firearm for self-defense, the authorities may, based on their judgment, issue a license for only a particular type of firearm. For marksmen, many restrictions ensue from the limits placed on the number of the firearms that can be owned. So then there's all these safe storage laws, and let me see where some of these sources are. So anyway, I'll tell you why Germany, and forget about the current rape issue. Germany is probably the more comparable case, okay, because it's not an island, first of all. So after 1945, even German police officers were initially not allowed to carry firearms. Private ownership of firearms was not allowed until 1956. The legal status returned essentially to that of the law on firearms and ammunition of 1928. The law was thoroughly revised in 1972 when the new restrictive Federal Weapons Act became effective, partly as a result of the terror of the Red Army faction. It was developed in the Federal Weapons Act of 2002 by amendments in 2008 and 2009. So that kind of brings up what I was going to talk about. So many of you don't know, but Germany was the target of a terror campaign in the 70s by the Baader-Meinhof faction, which was a communist fringe group that they were very famous for kidnapping a bunch of people. I think the most famous person they kidnapped was a former Nazi who became an industrialist named Hans Martin Schleyer. But they were known for assassinating people and attacking NATO bases and things like that. So the German police believed that they could do away with the RAF, as they were called, the Red Army faction, by limiting their access to firearms. But in reality, it didn't really work. And one of the reasons it didn't work was that they could arrest these people. They could limit the access to firearms. But ultimately, West Germany was, it had borders that were not exactly airtight. You could drive from Switzerland or Austria or Italy through Austria or whatever, where there were other terror groups in Italy, terror groups that I think were even worse than in Germany, and you could commit acts of terror. The RAF was, and remember, East Germany is right next door, so East Germany was bankrolling some of these terror groups, and so was the Soviet Union. And there were consistent attempts by the Soviet bloc to just fund these groups in order to destabilize West Germany as part of the Cold War. So these gun control laws, which were imposed on the general population, they don't really make any sense. Why would you care to have to violate a law by trying to buy a weapon legally or go through these hoops or whatever, when all you have to do in order to get some weapons would be to smuggle some of them across the border, and then you don't need guns in order to commit acts of terror. So it says on May 11th, 1972, the Baader-Meinhof gang placed 3 pipe bombs at the United States headquarters in Frankfurt. The bombing resulted in the death. I think it was the U.S. military headquarters in Frankfurt. The bombing resulted in the death of a U.S. officer and the injury of 13 other people. The stated reason for the bombing was a political statement in protest of U.S. imperialism, specifically protest of several mining facilities that belonged to the U.S. that were located in North Vietnam harbors. On May 19th, 1972, members of the Baader-Meinhof gang armed 6 bombs in the Axel Springer Verlag in Hamburg. Only 3 of the bombs exploded, but it was enough to injure 17 people. So I think that was some sort of mall or something. And one of the things that they would do is they would cooperate with groups in the Middle East, and they would receive training from groups in the Middle East, such as the PLO and the PFLP, both Palestinian groups in Jordan. and they would hijack planes. So security on planes was very loose in the 1970s. So they hijack. Many of you might have heard, and if you did hear of it, tell me in the chat, of the Entebbe raid, where the Israelis rescued some hostages in Uganda. But not enough people know about the Landshut. I think it's called the Landshut raid, where a Lufthansa flight, a German airliner, was hijacked by the PFLP and these people, the Baader-Meinhof gang, and flown to Somalia. That was in 1977. So then Chris Jones says Germans always screw everything up. Well, they know how to make sauerkraut, and they know how to make they actually know how to make guns, by the way. So anyway, there was a hijack of a German plane, a Lufthansa plane to Somalia by these people. So they were able to hijack that plane. Luckily, Germany has an excellent military and police force. I think the commando unit that rescued the plane was from the police, the GSG-9, and they rescued all the hostages. It was a flawless rescue. Somalia, which at the time was not a chaotic anarchistic state, it was actually, they did have a military dictator. They aided in the rescue. So, but that's something that not every country has proven itself willing to do, to rescue hostages, to stand up to domestic terrorism or international terrorism in that case. And it didn't have to come to that point. But this was in 1977. So I think that, let me see. I don't think that it actually. I think it took off from Rome, but Rome also has some Italy has some pretty strict gun control laws too because of organized crime, and they also had the issue of the they had their own guerrilla groups at that time. But simply put, when there were more restrictions on gun control in Germany, the these groups turned to bombings. They turned to, and they still were able to get some weapons, and they were able to commit kidnappings, and they were able to commit other crimes and bank robberies and things like that. Just because you outlaw weapons, it's not to say that you've eliminated the problem, because the weapons that are already out there are not going to be turned in by the people who own them. So I hope that you guys got a little perspective, and maybe you disagree, um, or you have a different take on it. But I personally think that the United States is not suited for gun control. Some countries might be, and I said, Japan. I think that they're a society where they've been able to limit the violence. And by the way, their gun control laws didn't help them in the 90s when this terrorist group, they were a cult, Aum Shinrikyo, they committed a sarin gas attack on the subway, and they were armed with automatic weapons that they stockpiled at their compound out in the mountains of Japan. So yes, I think it worked effectively, broadly speaking, in Japan. But there will come a day when somebody will have the power and the money and the will to violate any of these laws and commit a major crime. And I'm sorry to say that it happened in Japan. Um, yeah, Italy does have private gun laws. They do have private gun control. So it's I do believe if they started confiscating weapons, firearms, there would be a turn to bombs, possibly the poisoning. How are you going to regulate poison? Do you know how many substances there are that can kill millions of people that you can manufacture in a home? It's scary to think about. So yes, firearms restrictions may prevent may. Again, I don't think that it actually guarantees it. Remember, this is Miami area. There's plenty of smuggling going on. I mean, there's the Everglades, and there's smuggling with cigar boats from Cuba and Haiti and stuff like that. It's a peninsula. You would think that the water would keep smugglers away, but apparently not. It's a reality. People have to deal with it. That there's problems that our society is going to have that laws can't necessarily solve. And unfortunately, I wish I hadn't fucked up the video with the button or whatever. But we're going to have to live with that. We're going to have to live with the reality that people die in in mass shooting tragedies like this. So if it's not that, then I've had two friends who overdosed on heroin. I've had, I know people who have lost. I know, yeah, one of them. I know the parents. They had to deal with their son overdosing on heroin. So what are you supposed to do to prevent that? You can't have 100% success. It's a fantasy. So we're going to switch topics in a second. Lisa PDX, that's interesting. Pinochet says, just noticed yesterday how many government seals and flags have fascist symbols in them. Thoughts? Well, so he cites the flag of Argentina and the U.S. seal of the Senate. By the way, the government of Brazil too, or Brazil's flag, their flag has the words "Ordão e Progresso." I think I'm saying that correctly. Order and progress. That was from their fascist regime of the 40s and 50s under Getulio Vargas. who was he was a fascist, but he was a non-racist fascist. He was like an economic statist fascist or something. So yeah, Brazil, by the way, also. So if I want to address that, the seal of the Senate, I think it has the fasces in it, those sticks that are tied together. So those don't necessarily just represent fascism as a philosophy. Those represent the Roman concept of power. You know, that a bunch of sticks held together, bound together, are stronger than one stick on its own. So the flag of Argentina, which I didn't know that has fascist symbology, but Juan Perón, who was the leader in the 40s, 50s, and I think he was around until like the 70s, was a bona fide fascist and admirer of Mussolini and Hitler. So there's there's roots to that. I mean, it's not like, and they probably never ditched those principles, because Pinochet, I love his comments. Perón was not overthrown by Democrats. He was overthrown by military dictators. So Argentina until like 1982 was pretty much a military dictatorship, or under Perón was slightly less oppressive. But you get the point. So that was a brief answer to his query. Some other news. So I wish I had kept the other page, but I'm gonna have to fly without any guidance. So you have the issue of PDVSA. For those of you that have followed my coverage of Venezuela, which I can't keep up with all the bad news from there, and it's not a joke. Just like the topic of the shootings was not a joke, the shooting in Florida. Venezuela is probably the worst man-made non-war meltdown that I know about. Okay, so if you have a better example, go right ahead and tell me, because this is the worst thing that I've seen out of a country that has not been in a war. And they say the the refugee crisis there. The refugee crisis there has caused more has been caused by it's the worst refugee crisis not caused by a war in human history. So sorry, I was like trying to figure out where to find this source. I have another source that I lost, but there's a real issue with what to do about it. And one of the issues is that we do business with Venezuela's oil monopoly, which is PDVSA, their Petróleos de Venezuela. That's what they're called, PDVSA. And this week, there's two stories about PDVSA. I'll answer Pinochet and Dean Kruger's questions in a second. But I have here, this is from the Houston Chronicle. And the Houston Chronicle, just so you know, that they would be the closest to this crisis right now in the United States, because the headquarters of Citgo, which is PDVSA's partner in the United States, are in Houston. So it says 5 more charged in Houston in the PDVSA bribery case. Federal charges were unsealed Monday against 5 former Venezuelan government officials for their alleged role in an international money laundering effort involving bribes to obtain energy contracts from Venezuela's state-owned and state-controlled energy company, Petróleos de Venezuela. As part of a larger ongoing investigation by the U.S. government in a bribery at PDVSA that has to date brought charges against 15 individuals, including 10 who have pleaded guilty. The 5 indicted Monday, former officials of PDVSA and the Venezuelan government, were known as the, quote, management team, and wielded considerable influence within the Venezuelan energy company, according to the indictment. I wonder why their names aren't mentioned. The indictments are the latest charges coming out of Houston against companies and their employees for paying bribes, arranging kickbacks, and generally greasing the skids to win business in parts of the world where corruption is common. Over the past decade, Houston federal court has become one of the busiest in the nation for cases involving foreign bribery cases and for cases involving foreign bribery cases. I thought I made that mistake, but no, they just wrote that badly. In large part because of the concentration of energy companies that do business around the world. Houston accounted for 7, or about 1/4 of the 26 cases brought by the Justice Department in 2016 under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. International cooperation has spurred more investigations and led to even more indictments. Over the past few years, law enforcement agencies around the world have teamed up to pursue charges of international bribery. In the latest case, federal agents in Houston credited their law enforcement counterparts in Switzerland and Spain. So it says here, in Venezuela, the government has launched its own corruption investigation involving PDVSA and its U.S. subsidiary, Citgo, which is headquartered in Houston. It's unclear, however, if those investigations and subsequent arrests are aimed primarily at tightening Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro's hold on power. Venezuela, racked by this is the important part, racked by an economic and political crisis that left citizens without basic supplies, has attempted to oust much of its energy establishment in recent months. The country's chief prosecutor late last month ordered the arrest of Rafael Ramirez, PDVSA's former head, on suspicion of money laundering and embezzlement. In November, the acting president and 5 other Citgo executives were detained in Venezuela on allegations involving the possible embezzlement. Asdrubal Chavez, a cousin of the late Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez, was later installed as Citgo's chief executive officer. So it says several of these people were arrested in Spain, and one of them was extradited from there. A 5th dependent, Alejandro Isturiz Chiesa, remains at large. All 5 are Venezuela citizens. De Leon is also a U.S. citizen. The U.S. government alleges that 2 PDVSA vendors, Roberto Enrique Rincon Fernandez of the Woodlands and Abraham Jose Sierra Bastidas of Coral Gables, Florida, sent more than $27 million in bribe payments to an account in Switzerland for which De Leon was an owner. The money was later transferred to other Swiss accounts. But Roberto Rincon and Sierra previously pleaded guilty to violating the federal Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in connection with a scheme to bribe PDVSA officials. Rincon and Sierra are awaiting sentencing. Last year, Charles Quinard Beach III of Katy, Texas, an owner of several Texas energy companies, and Juan Jose Hernandez Comerma, a part owner of a Florida energy firm, each pleaded guilty to foreign bribery charges for their role in obtaining contracts from PDVSA. So, the Venezuelan government, I did a video, I think 3 months ago, about them arresting on their end a number of oil executives for PDVSA, and it means different things whether you're in the United States or in Venezuela. Here in the U.S., maybe I believe that there's corruption going on across the globe. So I don't think that by any means Venezuela is unique in terms of corrupt practices in the oil industry. As much as I'm a free market guy, I think the oil industry is out of control in so many ways, and they just ruin the ecosystem of so many parts of the world that it grinds my gears, as Peter Griffin would say. But in Venezuela, it's a different issue, and if we're holding our oil companies to account here in the United States, that's fine. I'm fine with holding them to account. But in many cases, and I've been trying to work with some information on a case directly relating to this, but in many cases, some of these outlets like Al Jazeera or Telesur, which is Venezuelan, which criticize U.S. oil policy here in the U.S. and across the globe, their motive is not in order to reduce the environmental damage from oil drilling, which is serious, and people should be concerned about it. But it is in order to keep oil prices at a sufficient level, because their economies of Qatar and a lot of these other oil petroarchies, I forgot what they're called, but petro states, they're completely dependent on oil. And Venezuela is one of the worst examples of a country that they had other industries, and they basically squandered them away because they thought, oh, the oil price is going to be fine and we can sustain ourselves on it for years and years. Well, no, that's the exact opposite has happened. The oil industries over there have pretty much been a curse, and they've and Venezuela has chased away all the other private industry, because they thought, oh, we can just take everything over and we'll just sell oil and we'll be able to live on that. Well, not so fast. Then the oil price crash happened. I think that was around 2013. I remember that the oil price went down very steeply in either 2013 or 2014. And we saw that at the pump. And suddenly Venezuela, which had already been in the grips of growing economic crisis, it just started to spiral out of control. And then you you have the added issue, unfortunately, of the neglect of the actual infrastructure of these oil companies. So they're not investing in new technology and in new and in replacing old and obsolete parts and assemblies and machines. So you have a less safe PDVSA, you have a less efficient PDVSA, you have one that's staffed with more and more cronies, and we've talked about this on the Testigo Venezuela interviews that I've done with I think with both Carlos and with Gabriel. It's a serious problem going on over there, that they basically use their company as a cash register. It's the People's Oil Company, but the government used it as a cash register. So you have all these people that were appointed by the government, and notice some of them were residents of Florida. So you have Chavista communist officials who moved to Florida under the guise of being, PDVSA employees, and they used it in order to secure, a windfall. They were making tons of money in bribe payments, and meanwhile their countrymen are starving to death. Their company is turning to shit because the people like them are in charge, and they won't upgrade the equipment, and they're stealing they're basically stealing from the cash register, while the refrigerator is not running. If they were owning a Quickie Mart, if I want to make the analogy. So that's what happened with that company. And you have a further story on the same topic of this from oilprice.com, citing Univision, says Venezuela's PDVSA faces a mass exodus of the workforce. So it's losing workers by the thousands, with as many as 10,000 leaving the company in just 1 week of January, media report, citing protests against low wages and the growing risk of accidents due to lack of equipment maintenance. The situation, according to Univision, has escalated to such, or Univision, if you know the channel and watch it, has stopped accepting letters of resignation. So it's so bad that they won't let you quit. Venezuela's main source of revenues, PDVSA, today produces around 1.6 million barrels of crude daily, the lowest in 30 years and down from 3.8 million barrels per day back in 1999 when Hugo Chavez came into power. Now, pressured by a deteriorating economy and sanctions, the oil company has no means to maintain its equipment and production, and it can't hold on to its workforce. As of August 2016, there were 143,000 people working for PDVSA. That figure has dwindled significantly, with the 10,000 weekly exodus representing 7% of the August 2016 figure. A regional oil and gas trade union leader told Univision that the workers no longer cared about receiving a severance package when they quit, as their salaries have become chump change amid inflation that has soared to ridiculous heights. One Venezuelan oil analyst noted that this is the first exodus of such proportions, not just in Venezuela, but in the history of the oil industry. What's perhaps worse than the scale of the problem is the qualification of those that are leaving, no longer just common laborers, but engineers with years of experience. This will further harm PDVSA, which is already struggling. In late January, Venezuela's oil minister said that it can easily manage an oil production increase of 1 million barrels per day this year to lift its production capacity to 2.472 million barrels per day. But last year, the country sitting on the world's largest oil reserve saw its crude oil production drop by 649,000 barrels per day, a 29% annual plunge, and probably the worst loss of oil production in a single year in recent history. Now that PDVSA workers are leaving in droves, if we are to believe the media reports, the production increase, Manuel Quevedo told S&P Platts looks increasingly unlikely. So, sorry for my garbled reading, but bottom line, when you treat this is how progressives and social democrats and especially democratic socialists view industries. They think that the industries exist in order to sustain the workers. I'm sorry, but we don't live in a world where people are motivated by the common good. PDVSA was an oil company. It exists in order to supply oil to its customers. And what Venezuela claimed that it was trying to do to make the company more of a company for the people than a company for the company. Because earlier, PDVSA was great, but it was really, the benefits were limited more for the employees and the executives of the company. Instead of doing that, they created this they created a network of nepotism. They appointed their buddies over the professionals to be the chiefs of this organization. And those people just ran with it. And they thought, oh, the common good includes me taking all these bribes and stashing a lot of the profits overseas or whatever, and investing money hand over fist in all sorts of crazy schemes or whatever. And these are socialists. And this is what happens when socialists realize that they have at their disposal, millions of dollars or billions of dollars of capital. They suddenly forget their ideals, and they say, well, we're going, we are bringing the money back to the people, so we deserve a huge cut. I hear it from people who are socialists all the time, justifying the, I hate to bring this up here, but Bernie Sanders' home, for example. They say, oh, he's worked so hard for so many years, he deserves another summer home in Vermont or whatever. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. Some of you people probably live in rat-infested apartments in fucking Oakland or something, and you love Bernie, and you're like, oh, he's worked for so many years, he deserves a third home. It's like, fuck you. If you don't realize that these people, that their whole issue is inequality, they get into a position where they have a significant amount of income coming their way. They forget about the inequality. The inequality is they think that until everybody solves the inequality problem, I don't have to solve it in my own house. That's the way I would describe it. And there's no better example than PDVSA, the story I'm just pointing at my screen, but that's the example that I have here. You have a company that was the golden goose that served a nation for decades and made it prosperous for many people, by the way. Venezuela was never a perfect country, and there was definitely turmoil there even before Chavez, and there was it's not like I'm saying that you can turn the clock back and look and Chavez inherited heaven, but compared to right now, yeah, it's kind of looking like it. It is. You didn't have starvation. You didn't have people fleeing across the border into Colombia, which is it is a war zone. So they're fleeing from a country in peace to a war zone. So I think about it. Even though I have problems in my own life, I think about what goes on over there just out of a sense of wonder. And I know that maybe some of you get tired of me talking about Venezuela. You might be asking, why don't you talk about Germany and the rape crisis, for example, that Lisa was talking about? And that's fine. Or South Africa, where there is a chance of a genocide against white people there, and also violence against the blacks there by other blacks. Yeah, there's other places in the world that are horrible, but the causes here are from the direct state intervention in the economy, and that's why I think Venezuela, for me, kind of takes my attention. And maybe some of you are getting tired of it, but I'm not, and I'll continue to really beat the drum over it, and talk about it. That's really one of the issues that's close to my attention. I'm gonna take a look at the chat for a second. So I have welcome to King Kush. Cheney wearing burqa, prospecting the Golan Heights. Okay, I don't know what the fuck that means, but good for you. King Kush, they survive with socialist-free electronic Bitcoin mining. Bandsaw Bandit. And so I forgot a couple of you. Pinochet says, have you heard of the Phrygian cap? Yeah. I think you're right, but I don't think the Phrygian cap necessarily means fascism. So I think it means it might be liberalism, but or it supports labor or something. I don't remember what it is. Dean Kruger. Let me see. Did I forget any topics? I think I forgot. Bruce Orr. So we'll get to Bruce Orr in 5 minutes. I'll answer your questions because I don't want to leave you guys till the end. So there's Bruce Orr and there's John Brennan, who I didn't put in the title. And for those of you that are joining late, I'm sorry, but there's no information in the description because I accidentally hit the button on my last live stream and ended it. And I had to scramble and get a new one. So I'll populate that later, and I'll call the other one part 1, and I'll call this one part 2. And hopefully you guys will, you guys will forgive me because it's what happened. It was President's Day week, or next week is President's Day, and presidents are usually forgiving, especially when people contribute to them large amounts of money. So Dean Kruger said, would you consider Venezuela a fascist nation now? Look, the definition of fascism is so loose that, yeah, why not? But I would consider it just a kleptocracy. That would be, and I'll put that in the chat for those of you that aren't familiar with the term. So a kleptocracy is a country where there's abundant resources, but the people at the top steal them and stash them abroad specifically. Every country has a kleptocracy inside, of elites that they take a lot of money and they, you don't have to be a socialist to believe in this. You can, I think capitalists can believe in this too, that there are certain people that they limit the freedom because they can get the resources. And you see in Venezuela, which purports to be a socialist country, they behave that way, and it's a kleptocracy, and they use the massive state security apparatus to enforce their will. And there's people like Lionel Nation, who they say, oh, you shouldn't give a fuck about what happens in Venezuela. We should care about what happens here in the U.S. Okay, fine. Well, what happens when Venezuela comes to the United States? First of all, the migrants are going to come to our borders eventually. That's going to be a problem, Lionel. You should worry about that. Okay, so that's the direct answer. And then what happens if Venezuela comes to the United States? The same type of issues, the same type of plundering, I believe, is happening in the United States. What do you think this Social Security scam is? What do you think about this California pension fuck clusterfuck? I'm sorry I get all emotional about this giant ball of shit that they call the pension crisis in Illinois and in Michigan, and that's the same type of management mentality that caused the PDVSA. And I don't know if it will reach the crisis proportions of people quitting and leaving, but Venezuela is proof that it can happen somewhere. And if it can happen there, it can happen elsewhere. There's no way to say, oh, you shouldn't give a fuck about what happens in another country because we should get our own house in order. Sorry, buddy, but when you see things happening in another country that was originally, fairly functional and now is basically on the verge of, blowing up, then yeah, I'm going to pay attention to this. So another couple people, the rapper 10,000, who's always a treat. But I saw Bandit said, "Hi Ramon." So I'll get to the rapper right after this. But what do you think about China and Russia's challenge on the petrodollar and their advancement in military strength? I think these are the pure reasons for much of U.S.'s military strategy. I'm concerned more about China than about Russia personally, and it's not because I hate China and it's not because I love Russia. But the truth is that if you look at China's, the sophistication of their strategy worldwide, where they're buying up assets around the globe, especially in East Africa. And yes, they do have a rapid militarization. Yes, I am worried about it, and what they've been doing in the South China Sea. But the answer, I think, is more. I think Donald Trump does have the right approach, and it's taken me a long time to really understand it. I don't know if I've understood it totally, but we do have to leverage the fact that without the United States, China does not have a consistent buyer of its consumer products. But as you probably know, if you pick up anything from the supermarket, made in China is likely stamped on it. So in other parts of the world, they might not buy as much volume as we do here from China, but they do need us. And I think that what he's doing to try to draw companies back to here and make it clear that the United States does still have I think they still have the best, we still have the best consumer economy in the world. I think that's the best approach. Now this petrodollar and some of their currency issues, I don't know what the United States can do. I think and unfortunately the Democrats are not helping with the situation, because they're not allowing him to do that. But what Donald Trump could have done, if he was given the freedom to do it, would be to break the China-Russia alliances on some of these issues and say because Russia, I think, would much rather have a relationship with a free country where they can have that will probably not invade them like the United States, or attack them, than they would with China. China, by the way, and Russia have never had a completely. They've always had sort of a love-hate relationship, even during the days of Mao and Stalin, because Russia is an imperial power. They always will be. There's no changing that. They'll always try to meddle in other countries' affairs. And on their back doors is China, and China has steadily regained its world power on the global scale since the 1940s. They've returned to being a global power, and they don't want to be managed by anybody else. In fact, now you can make the argument that they're just as powerful as the United States. And let me see if he put it in the chat. Maybe he's gone, but Floyd and Pink likes to remark that the real collusion is between China and the United States and Clinton. But that's because I started making videos about that. Yes, a lot of our corruption involving foreign influence is not, and there is from Saudi Arabia, and there is from Russia, and there is from Iran, and there is from Israel, and there is from a lot of other countries. But I'd say the worst corruption that we have in the United States is linked to our relationship with China, and it's a fact. And the answer is not to boycott these countries, and it's not to attack these countries, and it's not to create confrontational conflicts with the countries, but it is to fix our trade policy. And I think Donald Trump is doing the right thing there. You might disagree with me, but I think that's the way it is. Um, so the rapper 10,000 says, do you think that teachers should be armed to prevent school shootings? If these pacifists hate guns and these shootings, then fight back when they happen. A lot of people have been talking about teachers should be armed, and they use like countries like Israel as an example. But there's plenty of countries where teachers aren't armed, and these school shootings don't occur. So I think maybe it could be in some cases that could be an example. I wouldn't say every school should have armed teachers, but there have to be armed personnel on the premises. So the teacher issue, I think, is plenty of these teachers, first of all, would probably oppose it because they're idiots, and they'd say, "Oh, I don't know how to handle a weapon. I just teach speech. I teach drama. Why am I gonna? Why I just know drama. I don't know anything about handling a cult or whatever. That it'll only work if people actually embrace it. And what are you going to do? Dean Kruger said, I asked you if you thought Venezuela was a fascist nation. Yeah, I answered that question. I said not in the sense that you think. It's a kleptocracy. Lisa answered that. Lisa says, I think China would be interested in Venezuela. They are. They have a large investment there, and so does Russia, and so does Iran. The rapper 10,000, Democrats are too easy to open anybody with welcome arms without seeing the troubles that they bring with them. Venezuela is heading to civil war. Bandsaw Bandit, who I think is from Australia, says America's internal conflicts distract them from what is happening under their nose, and the media's lack of coverage on the issues that matter is concerning. Too many know too little. Yeah, I have to agree. And Dean Kruger, I think, is replying to somebody else. So let me get to the final topic, which is Russia and the investigation. So there are a couple topics that I want to discuss. So first of all, let me replenish my my beverage. So sorry, but I'm getting a little dry mouth from talking for I think I've been talking for over an hour and a half now, not counting the accidental button hit. And it feels good. I'm alert, and I know some of you see me drowsy at this point of the evening, but I'm actually very refreshed today. So, first of all, there's a story, and H.A. Goodman has covered it. For those of you that have not subscribed yet, I've been subscribed to him for a while. I think he does a great job in keeping updates flowing with regards to the DNC lawsuits and Julian Assange and the Russia investigation and all sorts of other crap that happens with regards to the FBI and all of that. So he covers this, that there's an exclusive that the DOJ official, Bruce Orr, the Department of Justice official, hid wife's Fusion GPS payments from ethics officials. So this is important because part of the basis for the case of opening an investigation into the Trump campaign was the fact that they used a dossier. They call it a dossier, but it was really just I would call it just a report. I've written a report. I've never written a dossier, but I have written reports in my life. And I don't see what's the difference between a report and a dossier, except that one sounds all fancy, and the other one sounds like something that you would read and try to learn from. So the Justice Department official Bruce Orr did not disclose Fusion GPS was paying his wife or was demoted from his post after the information emerged. Willfully falsifying government ethics documents can result in jail time. So Bruce I'm reading directly here. Bruce Orr, the Department of Justice official who brought opposition research on President Donald Trump to the FBI, did not disclose that Fusion GPS, which performed that research at the Democratic National Committee's behest, was paying his wife and did not obtain a conflict of interest waiver from his superiors at the Department of Justice. Documents obtained by the Daily Caller News Foundation show. The omission may explain why Orr was demoted from his post as Associate Deputy Attorney General after the relationship between Fusion GPS and his wife emerged, and Fusion founder Glenn Simpson acknowledged meeting with Orr. Willfully falsifying government ethics forms can carry a penalty of jail time if convicted. The Democratic National Committee, or DNC, hired Fusion GPS to gather and disseminate damning info about Trump, and they in turn paid Nellie Orr, a former CIA employee with expertise in Russia, for an unknown role relating to the dossier. So this is interesting. I didn't know. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I didn't know that his wife was a former CIA employee. That just makes this worse. What's this whole incestuous relationship between people and these intelligence agencies? It kind of makes me sick here. So Nellie Orr, a former CIA employee with expertise in Russia, for an unknown role related to the dossier. Bruce Orr then brought the information to the FBI, kicking off a probe and a media firestorm. The Department of Justice used it to obtain a warrant to wiretap a Trump advisor, but didn't disclose to the judge that the DNC and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's campaign had funded the research and that Orr had a financial relationship with the firm that performed it, which could be, it turns out, because Orr doesn't appear to have told his supervisors. Some have suggested that the financial payments motivated Bruce Orr to actively push the case. For 2014 and 2015, Bruce Orr disclosed on ethics forms that his wife was an independent contractor earning consulting fees. In 2016, she added a new employee who paid her a salary, but listed it vaguely as cyber threat analyst and did not say the name of the company. The instructions require officials to provide the name of your spouse's employer. In addition, if your spouse's employer is a privately held business, provide the employer's line of business. As examples, excuse me, it gives Xylophone Technologies Corporation and DSLK Financial Techniques Incorporation, or financial services. The dollar amount does not need to be disclosed. Report each source, whether a natural person or an organization or entity that provided your source. Geez, more than $1,000 of earned income during the reporting period, they say. The DOJ says financial disclosure reports are used to identify potential or actual conflicts of interest. If the person charged with reviewing an employee's report finds a conflict, he should impose a remedy immediately. Its guidance says employees should always seek the advice of an ethics official when contemplating any action that may be covered by the rules. So Paul Kaminer, a Washington, D.C. public policy lawyer experienced in executive branch ethics and disclosure laws, said, based on my reading of the regulations and disclosure guide accompanying the form, he failed to disclose the source of his wife's income on line 4 by not including the quote name of the employer. So that's an infraction. It might be, shitty paper, kind of a technicality, but what the hell? You also started a fake fucking investigation over nothing, over people peeing on a bed. The law provides that whoever knowingly and willfully fails to file information required to be filed on this report faces civil penalties up to $50,000 and possible criminal penalties up to 1 year in prison under the disclosure law and possibly up to 5 years in prison under 18 U.S. Code 1001, he said. Since he lists her income type as salary as opposed to line 1, where he describes her other income as consulting fees as an independent contractor, it's clear that she was employed by a company that should have been identified by name. And even with respect to her independent contractor listing, it appears incomplete by not describing what kind of services were provided. Both these omissions do not give the reviewing official sufficient information to determine whether there is a conflict, Kamenar added, or also did not get a conflict of interest waiver from his supervisor, suggesting that he may not have explained to anyone the true source of the income and how it intersected with his official involvement in the case, nor did he have approval. Okay, so I'm gonna skip over because there's a lot of crap here and it's long. So I'm gonna share this. I think I already shared it in the description for the previous video. So sorry again. You'll have to go to my previous video to find the sources here until I update everything and move it over to this one. I'll just put this one in the chat. King Kush, the source was Ukrainian Jerky Boy, his prank calls. I love that call. It was great. Bandsaw Bandit, if Russia changed the results through a few Facebook and Twitter ads, and it doesn't say much for the easy manipulation of the American mind, and don't worry about American overt election manipulation. If you like that, just wait till I get to the next story, which is the last. So if you want to talk about that, so Dean Kruger says, is Carter Page still under that FISA warrant surveillance, or did they give that up? So far as I know, they are, or he is. I think he still is under FISA surveillance. The lack of disclosure is the latest of several examples of people trying to conceal the financial relationship that Fusion GPS, which was funded by the DNC, had with the family of the DOJ official. In Fusion GPS founder Simpson's November House interview, he conspicuously omitted his relationship with Nellie Orr, painting Bruce Orr as someone who he was connected to independently. Investigators said, "You've never heard from anyone in the U.S. government in relation to those matters, either the FBI or the Department of Justice." And it says here, "I was asked to provide some information by a prosecutor named Bruce Orr." And investigators said, "Did Mr. Orr reach out to you?" It says, "It was someone that Chris Steele knows, and I met Bruce too through organized crime conferences or something like that. Chris told me that he had been talking to Bruce and that Bruce wanted more information and suggested that I speak with Bruce." Simpson also said his firm was not affiliated with any Russian speakers, even though Nellie Orr appears to speak the language. So yeah, that could be a perjury charge. I don't know, unless he didn't know that she speaks it. So Lisa, yeah, nice comment. Rapper, I will answer that question in probably 2 or 3 minutes. Simpson suggested in court records on December 12, 2017, that the only way government investigators could have found out about Nellie Orr's relationship with the company was through its bank records. Bank records reflect that Fusion contracted with Nellie Orr, a former government official expert in Russian matters, to help our company with its research and analysis of Mr. Trump. I am not aware of any other sources from which the committee or the media could have learned of this information, he said. Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, a conservative legal group, has been critical of the department's handling of the Trump investigation, said, "This document ought to trigger an immediate criminal investigation if one isn't already ongoing." So then you have some people, sounding off. I love Tom Fitton, and he's one of the greatest people involved in this type of thing, investigating what's going on with the FBI. So for those of you that don't know, just Judicial Watch is an organization that he heads, and they do have a YouTube channel, and I've actually I've contacted them over some things that I want investigated because I just don't have the means. So the rapper 10,000 answered a question: what do you think needs to be done about these politically biased teachers in the schools, especially the ones who push Hillary and hate Trump? And Lisa PDX also replied. She said, "I do enjoy the Red Elephants YouTube channel has a series called Film Your Marxist Professors that I think is gaining traction and resulting in consequences." So yeah, the issue with teachers, I think, is very important. And I've spoken to a teacher on this show who didn't want to disclose her information about even where she lived, or we had to have a fake name for her and everything. And this was back when the show had even less viewers than it has now. So, woohoo, whatever. But um, when it comes to teachers who are political, I think, I had a teacher who was my 10th grade AP US history teacher who was overtly political, but and I hated her. She was a piece of crap. But even her, she was vocally super liberal, and I think she helped me through her example. Ironically, helped me disavow liberalism as a political philosophy. I mean progressive liberalism, not classical liberalism. For those of you that are confused, but this, at least she would at least listen to people with opposing viewpoints, and allow us to express ourselves. Then she would give us a shitty grade. But what do you want? You can't have them all. And there's a lot of people who nowadays are much worse than this professor I had back in I think it was the year 2001, because it was when the terror attacks happened on 9/11. So the answer to this is that yes, you have to have positively a ban on professors and teachers who teach at publicly funded colleges from indoctrination. But then the question becomes, where do you draw the line between people giving their opinion and giving their honest viewpoint on a certain topic? Because teachers do certain things happen during the day. Let's say people are talking about the school shooting today, and teachers do have a right to express themselves under the First Amendment. What they don't have the right to do is to limit the First Amendment of people who are in their classroom, and then within reason. Obviously, you don't want a student to be disruptive and to threaten other people. That's a different issue. But I hear people talking about how even in math classes in college, there's professors who make it political. And one of the biggest mistakes was to start diversity requirements for many of these schools. So you would have to, and for example, I went to a state school. We had a requirement for I think 20 diversity credits or something like that. And I took classes like diversity in sports and black music of two worlds and African American religion, and I think the last one I might have missed one, but one of them was communication in Asia, and most of those were okay courses. And the communication in Asia was good. It was not politically slanted. If you pardon the use of, yeah, I guess I just said Asian's course politically slanted. So sorry guys. I guess I'm some sort of bigot. But there was the other course that I took that was great was the Black Music of Two Worlds, because it was focused on the music and what was so good about African rhythms and syncopation and jazz and how they came to be, and some of the great creators and ragtime. It was fantastic. And the Black religion course was very overtly political and driven toward, and the teacher was a Marxist, but he was knowledgeable about the topic. So I'm not going to claim that these courses cannot be taught competently, but obviously there are many cases, and the diversity in sports class was one of them, where it's both taught incompetently and there's a clear political bias. So in that class, we had 8 weeks. This was a 16-week semester. So there were 8 weeks that were concentrated on black athletes, and then there were 8 weeks concentrated on female athletes, and then there was one day of the whole year that was or the whole semester that was concentrated on disabled athletes. So that's your diversity for you: black, women, and disabled. And they wouldn't even talk. I did my I did my final project on immigrant athletes from foreign countries, from Cuba and from Russia and whatever, and what their challenges are, and they didn't give a shit. It was like, oh, original idea, whatever. So a lot of these people, they develop these lesson plans that are actually, they're geared towards limiting not only your freedom of expression, but your creativity even within the bounds of it. So, and that was during my freshman year. So I think that having that experience with that course, and I wrote to the teacher later. I said, there's other issues of diversity than women, blacks, and disabled people. You can talk about other topics, and I never got a response. And I think I even sent the letter or the email 2 times. But that's their attitude, that they have a program to deliver, and they want you to absorb their agenda. And yeah, I think that you have to have first of all, so what's the solution? You have to scrap those requirements. You have to end diversity requirements. And the people who are genuinely interested in those courses would get to learn them. And people can do it on their free time. And you can make them electives, but the whole motivation for making them requirements was in order to create a cottage industry of those jobs for those people. And this is, you're talking to somebody. I think, for example, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was, I think, 13 years old. So there's definitely an appreciation for that part of Black history. Roberto Clemente, I think I read his. I don't know if I read his whole his whole biography, but I remember reading about him as well. And Gordon Parks, for those of you that know who he is, a filmmaker from the 70s, and Quincy Jones, and I read about a lot of diverse topics when I was and they weren't assigned reading. But I had to have the motivation for it. And there are people that have the motivation for it. But when you have people being forced to take these courses in schools, and I'm talking about Black people too, in the Black religion course, half of the class was Black people, because we live in a majority Black city here. But they hated the course because the lecturer, who was also Black, was a atheist. So he's teaching a religion course to a lot of people who go to Baptist and Pentecostal and AME churches and whatever, and he's basically telling them, Christianity was basically forced on the slaves, and you should probably wake yourselves to the reality that it's a lie and something like that, blah blah blah. They hated it. There was much more resentment on the part of the Black students to this anti-Christian Black professor than me, because I'm not Christian. I wasn't offended by a single thing in that course. I disagreed with the guy, but he didn't say anything that contradict. And he talked about Islam as well in critical terms. He talked about Judaism, I think, in critical terms. But he was very knowledgeable, but he was clearly biased in favor of atheism. So I hope that answers your question, because we're going to go back to Russia, just like CNN. And see if there's any more questions. By the way, if you want to ask a question, please tag me, because it's easier to spot it. Slants is allowed by the Supreme Court. Yeah, I saw that. That's a pretty funny story that happened. Chris Jones, I realized I was the bad guy for immutable characteristics. I wrote papers being presidents against whites and got A's. Are you? I don't know. I mean, Chris, are you white? Because I could care less, but I'm just asking. The rapper says, I took a history of cinema class, and my teacher was a big feminist who hated Trump men and embraced Hillary. So I walked out of the class because of the politically charged class. I mean, yeah, look, you got to do what you got to do. I've only once canceled or dropped a class because of something like that. It was because I knew that the woman wouldn't let me take the religious holidays I wanted. Yes, you got to play the game and go underground with your true belief, like the Jews did under the Nazi reign. I don't know if it's that bad, but it is pretty bad. Chris Jones says, yes, he is white. Yeah, I mean, look, they focus the whole curriculum on pushing an agenda, and it doesn't help. It doesn't really help people, even if some of the stuff they say is correct. It doesn't help people. Chris Jones says, I took as many courses as I could. I'm so glad I decided to diverge from my software engineering degree to pick up 7 more courses in the social justice, race, etc. I had no. Well, now were those requirement courses? Just answer that if you can, because you know, mine were requirements. Believe me, I didn't really want to take you know, communication in Asia or something. So the last story. I don't know why they hide these comments. King Cuss says, I wonder if the Pussy Hat generate from Pussy Riot band Russian collusion. Huh. Yeah, that's a funny pun. Chris Jones said, not a requirement at the time. It suggested, well, I think you screwed yourself then. So, you know, I'm sorry to hear that you took those courses, but you know, I think it's a waste of money, a lot of them. They don't really teach marketable skills, and what you do learn in the course you can read on your own free time. And I personally do read about stuff like that. I don't know if you guys do. So the last story, and then we're going to break for the night. Even though honestly I like the vibe from you guys today, is about John Brennan. And if you saw my last video, my last produced video, which was concerning Rob Reiner's ridiculous Russia collusion video, you would know that John Brennan has been going to the media, and he's been going to, in particular, Rob Reiner, but I think he's been hired by one of the networks or one of the newspapers to be a correspondent. It might be MSNBC, but the other guy in the video, James Clapper, might have been the one hired by MSNBC or NBC News to be their intelligence analyst correspondent or whatever. And that's basically, you know, that's a huge conflict of interest for those news organizations. But it says that he has a perjury peril, and it says House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes next plans to investigate the role former CIA Director John Brennan and other Obama intelligence officials played in promoting the salacious and unverified Steele dossier on Donald Trump, including whether Brennan perjured himself in public testimony about it. In his May 2017 testimony before the intelligence panel, Brennan emphatically denied the dossier factored into the intelligence community's publicly released conclusion last year that Russia meddled in the 2016 election, quote, to help Trump's chances of victory. Brennan also swore that he did not know who commissioned the anti-Trump research document, even though senior national security and counterintelligence officials at the Justice Department and FBI knew the previous year that the dossier was funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign. Last week, Nunes, Republican of California, released a declassified memo exposing surveillance abuses by the Obama DOJ and FBI in their investigation of Trump's ties to Russia. So, you know, let's scroll down to where it talks about Brennan. So it says, John, those are the first 2 phases of Nunes' multi-part inquiry, a senior investigator said. in phase 3, so that's just talking about the Steele dossier itself. It says in phase 3, the involvement of the intelligence community will come into sharper focus. The aide, who spoke only on condition of anonymity, said Nunes will focus on Brennan as well as President Obama's first CIA director, Leon Panetta, along with the former president's intelligence czar, James Clapper, and National Security Advisor Susan Rice, and security officials and security advisor turned UN Ambassador Samantha Power, among other intelligence officials. John Brennan did more than anyone to promulgate the dirty dossier, the investigator said. He politicized and effectively weaponized what was false intelligence against Trump. Attempts to reach Brennan for comment were unsuccessful. Several Capitol Hill sources say Brennan, a fiercely loyal Obama appointee, talked up the dossier to Democratic leaders as well as the press during the campaign. They say he also fed allegations about Trump-Russia contacts directly to the FBI while pressuring the Bureau to conduct an investigation of several Trump campaign figures starting in the summer of 2016. So, then it goes into some of the details of what happened and how he gave. It says, for example, the CIA chief gave an unusual private briefing to then Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid of Nevada, in which he told Reid the Russians were backing Trump and that the FBI would have to take the lead in an investigation because the FBI is a federal agency in charge of domestic intelligence. And unlike the FBI, the CIA can spy on U.S. citizens. Also, the FBI is a law enforcement organization. The CIA isn't. 2 days after Brennan's special briefing, Reid fired off a letter to then FBI Director James Comey demanding he open an investigation targeting individuals tied to Trump to determine if they coordinated with the Russian government to influence our election. So the question then is, simply, did Brennan present what evidence did Brennan present to Harry Reid? Because if it is the dossier, then yes, he did perjure himself. Because on several occasions, in fact, he said that the dossier was not the report. I like to call it the report, but let's keep calling it the dossier. He on several occasions claimed, well, that's not really what went into it, but clearly it did, and that's what went into the FISA warrants. And apparently, based on the timeline, his action in going to Reid started part of the chain reaction that eventually led it back to the FBI. Congressional investigators say that the explosive information Reid referred to was the false or unverified claims in the Clinton-funded dossier, which the sources say were passed along by Brennan. They added that Brennan gave more than one briefing. After Trump won the election, sources say that CIA director sought to weaponize the dossier's wild accusations against the president-elect. In early January, just weeks before Trump was inaugurated, investigators say Brennan saw to it that the contents from the dossier were attached to an official daily intelligence briefing for Obama. The special classified briefing was then leaked to the major Washington media, allowing them to use the presidential briefing to justify the publication of claims that they had up to that point not been able to substantiate and had been reluctant to run. CNN broke the news that the dossier described as classified documents had been attached to the briefing report by the CIA and had been given to the president. The top-level credence that the government was placing in the dossier gave prominent newspapers, including the Washington Post and the New York Times, justification to follow suit. In addition, BuzzFeed published 35 pages of the dossier in full. The internet news outlet was recently sued by Trump campaign lawyer Michael Cohen, whom the dossier accused of conspiring with the Kremlin to pay Russian hackers. Okay. At the time, the Washington Post was assured by Obama intelligence officials that the sources involved in the dossier's reporting, well, I guess you can't write the report's reporting, were credible enough to warrant inclusion of their claims in the highly classified presidential report. Months later, in public testimony, however, Brennan said the dossier and its sources were not credible enough to incorporate the information in a separate January 2017 intelligence report on Russian election interference publicly released by the administration. The published unclassified version of the report nonetheless echoes the dossier's central assertion that Moscow meddled in the election to help Trump. Brennan later swore the dossier did not in any way factor into the CIA's assessment that Russia interfered in the election to help Trump. However, congressional investigators suggest a still classified version of the January 2017 intelligence report contradicts his claim. Also in his May 2017 testimony, Brennan swore he had no idea who commissioned the dossier. So that might be a hard part to verify if he knew that Clinton and her groups and her campaign funded it. CIA veterans say Brennan was the most politicized director in the agency's history and was responsible for much of the anti-Trump bias from the intelligence community during the campaign and transition period. Former CIA field operations officer Gene Coyle, a 30-year agency veteran who served under Brennan, said he was known as the greatest sycophant in the history of the CIA and a supporter of Hillary Clinton before the election. He said, I find it hard to put any real credence in anything that the man says. So yeah, there's much more in this article, and I think I'll put it in the chat for you to read, because it's not. I don't know if it's in the description. It's not. It is in the description of the other video, but that's it for tonight. The rapper 10,000, Archie Bunker to Rob Reiner. What is your problem? You mean exactly? If you watch that video I made, yeah, he is a meathead. He's out of his mind. If he's not acting, then he's a complete idiot. Rob Reiner. Lisa PDX, your approach is consistent and honorable. I subscribe to the belief, keep your enemies closer. I'm an undercover operative / Jew in a severe SJW Democrat Nazi state. Okay. Chris Jones says, for me, male teachers, it is somewhat easier to work out a deal. But for me, some feminist teachers who hate me and other males make me want to kick their ass. Yeah. Girls were girls and men were men. Those are the days. He's talking about the theme song from that show. That show was actually pretty good. If you like, whether you like Rob Reiner or not, it was an amazing show. But I don't think he was the highlight of the show. It was really, Carol O'Connor, who played Archie Bunker, and who was I don't know who played this. I think, was it Sally? I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert on the show. It was before my time. I just saw some reruns on Nick at Night of it. Here in Chicago, too many Black Revolution groups are anti-Trump, but fails to see how corrupt and racist Hillary and the DNC truly are. Well, I think some of the more radical Black groups don't believe either side. So Dean Kruger says, holy crap, it's 1 o'clock. I've got to work in the morning. See you, folks. Good night. And I think that's where, yeah, Sally Struthers and Sally Fields. I thought it was Sally Struthers. So that's it. He's right. We all got to go. And I'll talk to you guys later. And I hope you guys enjoyed this evening. I felt like a lot more energy tonight. And, we'll see what the coming days portend. I've got some planned live streams. There's a live stream happening on Saturday night concerning pornography and obscenity laws, and possibly 2 more streams next week with some guests. So salutations, and have a great Friday and a great weekend.